This one's been a long time coming, so let's talk about the Aurorus Audio Borealis. A few things to note about this company. It was started by enthusiasts in the audiophile community. It's something they do as a side gig, so supply is short. These aren't exactly easy to come by. They do have a wait list on their website. You can sign up for your notifications if this is something that you actually want. And lastly, this is a demo unit sent over by Aurorus Audio for me to check out. So with all that said, let's talk about build and comfort. I've seen a lot of people online before say that Borealis looks like a DIY project, and the truth is that pictures and video don't really do this headphone justice. I will agree that in some areas it does not have the polish and finish of a really high-end headphone from established manufacturer, but at the same time, it doesn't skimp on build. It certainly has a bit of an industrial look to it, but Borealis is a really solid headphone in the hand. We're looking here at an open back dynamic with hybrid pads, a wire headband, and a seatbelt style suspension strap with padding added on with Velcro. You can remove this padding, but I don't know why you would, because it's always nice to have extra padding. The headband is very floppy, and you can adjust it up and down with these pieces on the side, just like a Dan Clark headphone. There's metal yokes here that have a pretty wide range of motion. Mini XLR ends on the bottom. I do find the headband a little bit frustrating at times when I'm trying to put it on and it wants to flop around, but it's not uncomfortable. The only complaint I have with building comfort truly is that the pads are a little bit small for me vertically. This isn't the end of the world. In fact, I think it'll fit a lot of people just fine. Vertically, these pads are about the same height as a lot of your classic Hyphaman pads. But those pads are also just a little bit too small for my ears. So as a result, after an hour or so, I start to get a little bit of vertical clamp on my ears, and it's just not as comfortable as it could be. I spoke to the guys about it. You can't really put a larger pad on this thing without changing the air volume and thus changing the tuning, which makes sense. This is definitely a headphone designed with function in mind, and tuning is a massive part of that. So like I said, while I don't think that's going to be a problem for most people, they are just a little bit too small of pads for my own personal taste. Interestingly enough, we'll touch on that bit about the pads later in the conclusions of this video, but I think it's time to talk about subjective sound. Then we'll get into frequency response after that. I'll say this several times in the video, but if you want the quick and short version, Borealis is somewhere between a Focal and a ZMF headphone. Now, that sounds fantastic right off the bat, and truth be told it is. There's some caveats to that, but for the most part, Bore sounds great. The bass and mid-range is very linear, just a hair warm, but very linear. Texture and detail in the mid-range are fantastic. We do get a bit of an elevation around 1 kilohertz. That's definitely audible, but not annoying like it is to me in some other cases, like in electrostatics. Most every case in the past where I've heard a 1 to 1.5 kilohertz bump, it's always bothered me. In fact, many cases it's been a deal breaker. I have to EQ it out of the COS ESP95X, otherwise I just can't wear it. But on this headphone, that bump doesn't bother me. In fact, it actually benefits the timbre a lot. The rest of the treble sounds linear, definitely not bright, a little bit recessed through some parts of the treble, but still airy, and not recessed enough to ever be classified as dark. In fact, across the board, it just sounds like a very linear headphone. And as a result of this, timbre really is where this thing shines. When I first got into headphones, timbre wasn't the most important thing to me. Tuning definitely was, and so was soundstage, but as time went on and on, timbre became more and more crucial to my listening experience. Because there's so many things in the high end that can do so many things right, but timbre they just can't nail down. Borealis, it seems, was made with timbre in mind. Everything sounds very, very, very natural. And that's why this headphone for me sits between a ZMF and a Focal, because it has a frequency response that reminds me of some Focals with that bump around 1.5K, and it has great dynamics, maybe not quite as dynamic as a Focal, but it has the timbre of a ZMF headphone. Now, this isn't going to out-timbre something like Otor or Atrium, but this also costs a lot less than both of those headphones. And while timbre might not be as good as the more expensive Otor, well, I'd say the tuning actually sounds a little bit better. Detail-wise, it's not mind-blowing, but it is pretty solid. It definitely stands out in terms of detail for a dynamic driver headphone, and fits a nice balance where it's just detailed enough that I can enjoy it without being fatigued. I wouldn't say that it is a headphone for critical or analytical listening. In fact, overall, it's definitely a more relaxed and enjoyable listening experience. But it does a great job of avoiding being grainy and is still more detailed than other famous dynamic driver headphones, things like a 6XX, a DT1990, or even a Focal LX. Which it should, because this is priced more than any of those headphones. And thankfully, the performance does hold up to that price, which is even more impressive considering this isn't a headphone from a big manufacturer, but makes sense when you realize it's a headphone created by hardcore hi-fi enthusiasts. Now let's talk about frequency response. Bass does roll off. It is a dynamic driver and that will happen, but it holds up reasonably well. The bass and mid-range are pretty linear. It has a bit of warmth to it, as I mentioned before, and then we see this elevation between 1 and 2 kilohertz. Thankfully, the elevation is smooth. It's not just a sharp peak, but it is there. As I mentioned, this elevation doesn't bother me like it does in many other headphones that have a similar elevation, but it's worth noting that this is there, especially if you're very sensitive to that frequency range. Now above that, train, don't put that in the video. And overall, it still sounds very balanced. All in all, frequency response, pretty straightforward. So now that that's been covered, let's talk about amplification and then conclusions. Now, this headphone came into me with a balanced cable. Does it need the extra power? No, it definitely doesn't. This thing is very easy to power. I do think that the quality of your amp and DAC matters with this, but even on something as weak as a shitfulla, well, I was listening to it at low enough volumes that I was almost starting to get into channel imbalance territory on that amp, and that amp puts out very, very little power. I did like it quite a bit on the FiiO K9 Pro, and I did manage to use it balanced on that amp because that amp is great at avoiding channel imbalance. I can just flip it to low gain, and then they paired very nicely together. I don't think you need an amplifier that expensive to get the most out of this headphone, but you're certainly not going to hurt yourself by using an amplifier of that quality. Now let's talk about conclusions. The Aurorus Audio Borealis is a great headphone. It's a headphone that has a little bit of warmth, it's well balanced, it's airy, the timbre is incredible, the detail's great, the soundstage is right up there where it needs to be, though a bit more intimate than some of the larger focals in the game. Vocal presence is solid, vocal clarity is excellent, and I would absolutely be buying this headphone right now if the pads were a little bit larger, which sucks because I know that's totally a me thing, but it just doesn't quite fit my head. I wish it did, because if it did, I would use this headphone almost every day, and that's how it goes. Nothing is perfect, but Borealis is pretty great. If you wanna know about a headphone that I am buying though, I have a review coming out soon of the ZMF Atrium. So make sure you stick around, subscribe, because you don't want to miss that. Thank you to Aurorus Audio for letting me borrow this Borealis. I'm going to send this thing back your way. For everyone else watching this video, I think that's going to wrap this one up. If you like this video, please leave a like down below, a comment letting me know what you want to see in the future. If you want to get active in the community, help support the channel, you can get access to my Telegram chat through the Patreon linked in the video description. And as always, don't forget to stick around and subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Till the next one, guys. Peace.